Good morning and greetings from Soviet Institute of Engineering and Technology, Meerut, a NAC accredited deemed to be university, and it's a center of excellence, Center for Informatics Development Solutions and Application, invites the participants and the chief guest, Dr. B.K. Mishra, for its second edition of International Webinar Series on Open Source Digital Technologies Towards Self-Reliant India, Atmanirbhar Bharat. We had the first edition on 12th September 2020 on open technologies to provision simple and economical IT infrastructure, addressed by Dr. B. Balasubramanian, former Deputy Director General, National Informatics Center, and Head of National Informatics Center, Open Technology Center, Chennai. Today, on 18th September 2020, we have an address by Dr. B.K. Mishra, a veteran in open source technology, on the title A Roadmap for Students Using Free and Open Source and Reaching Goals of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Dr. B.K. Mishra has over 30 years of experience in the IT industry and academia, and he has rich experience of working in senior management and leadership positions of prominent multinational companies, along with a substantial involvement with mentoring and entrepreneurship. Presently, he works for Adapro Consulting as its Chief Technology Officer. He has worked in the areas of operating systems, middleware, and interoperability. His contribution to open source software and Linux has been well acknowledged. He has led many system software product engineering and consulting projects while working for iconic technology companies like Digital, Hewlett Packard, Novell, and Sun. He began his career with the National Informatics Center NIC, a prominent institution of Government of India, and headed the System Software Division for several years. His current interests includes areas in cloud computing and predictive intelligence. I would like to introduce the theme. We are talking about open infrastructure, open source software for open infrastructure, and the next series will be on open hardware for open infrastructure. Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India, is a vision of our Honorable Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, of making India a self-reliant nation, rested on five I's: intent, inclusion, investment, infrastructure, and innovation, and based on five pillars. One is economy, quantum jump and not incremental. Infrastructure, one that represents modern India. Systems, 21st century technology driven. Vibrant demography, source of energy for self-reliant India. And demand, whereby the strength of our demand and supply chain should be utilized to full capacity. This was announced in 15th May 2020 by the central government through a special and comprehensive economic package of INR 20 lakh crore that accounts for 10% of India's GDP to bring the economy back on track. Our intent is vocal for local to make it global, a demand based economy system which is self producing and self consuming. Open source, an extremely important aspect of Digital India. A number of open source projects has been crowned with a remarkable technical and economic success. Take it Apache, a web server, an operating system Linux, and internet transfer mail agent SendMail are the most notable examples. Open source movement, which has focused on democratizing technology areas access, has over a two-decade history in India. Today, some of the largest e-governance projects of startups in India are running on open source software. In 2015, Department of Electronics and Information Technology, called DAITI, of the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology, released three major policies related to open source. These policies are quite comprehensive and potential game changers. Policy on adoption of open source software for Government of India. Policy on collaborative application development by opening the source code of government applications, which intends to increase the pace of e-governance application development and rapid rollout or implementation by adapting an open source development model based on current worldwide practices like GitHub or SourceForge. Policy on open application programming interface, open APIs for Government of India, for promoting open standards for software interoperability across various government departments and agencies. Government of India has already notified the policy on open standards for e-governance and technical standards on interoperability framework for e-governance. The worldwide initiative on open government also focus on open APIs to easily access the information collected by government organizations. The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has taken many initiatives for promoting and fostering adoption of free and open software, the acronym FOSS, in view of various inherent advantages like increasing interoperability, developing local capacity industry, reducing cost, conserving foreign exchange, achieving vendor independence, enabling localization, and reducing piracy and copyright infringement. India's strength in information technology can be further utilized to develop products using FOSS, which will help in bridging the digital divide with significant cost savings and facilitate the creation of a knowledge society. Indian industry and SMEs can benefit from the liberal licensing norms of FOSS, which enables software to be freely modified and distributed. I would like to quote our first open source scalable application was District Plan of the District Program of NIC 1987-88 to facilitate district level micro level planning embedded with built-in ANSI SQL interface and built-in GIS add-on was developed during 1989-91. The technology deployed is C, Lexicon, York, Make, AWK, SED, and data storage, dictionary-driven scheme-defined files, and operating systems co-Unix and 88 Unix. The scientist who was involved in building such application in 1989, which includes Mr. Keshav Tripathi, and he is now a co-founder and CEO of a very successful, startup Nirmalaya lab based at Bhubaneswar. The identified thrust areas as per MAITI, research and development in the areas of FOSS, deployment of FOSS tools and technologies, training and support on FOSS tools and technologies, human resources development in the areas of FOSS. Today's synopsis and on which Dr. B.K. Mishra is going to talk is on roadmap for students using free and open source software and reaching the goals of Atamnirbhar Bharat. According to him, there is an increasing emphasis on learning computing methods for solving known and futuristic problems. Students of today have to get appropriate grounding to use existing methods and be encouraged to think, to learn, and to innovate without significant barriers. Free and open source software provides an adequate ecosystem for doing these things. The talk introduces some of the ideas involved and provides a guidelines for aspiring students to become software developers. This is what the Shobhit Institute of Engineering and Technology, Meerut, through its Center for Informatics Development Solutions and Application, would like to promote for the emerging and upcoming, students as a software developer in a very big manner. And our chief patron, Chancellor, Shobhit Institute of Engineering and Technology, Meerut, and Chancellor of Soviet University, Colombo, Uttar Pradesh, welcome all the participants and the chief guest of the session, Dr. B.K. Mishra. Dr. B.K. Mishra, I welcome and invite you to deliver your address to the participants. Dr. B.K. Mishra.
Thank you, Professor Moni. I am thankful to CIDSA for inviting me for this talk. I think the gathering is very, I mean, immensely, uh, well known. I understand there are international participants and a large body of students who will be, listening to this presentation. In my own way, I will try to, introduce you to why it makes sense to put all your efforts behind open source software and free and open source software, and how does it really benefit a country like India, which has got huge population and in fact a huge young population who can really contribute towards making the country self-reliant. As is called by the government's, clarion call to make it Atmanirbhar Bharat. I believe there is a good scope for contributing to this effort using the free and open source software. And I think in the next about an hour or so, I believe I have got, I will try to, build up a case in favor of open source software and try to probably, motivate the students to adopt it as a part of their learning and really do nice things so that not only they benefit in their career, the country also benefits it in its goal towards self-reliance. I I again thank the CIDSA administration and Professor Moni for taking this initiative to bring up this topic, and I hope it will be beneficial for everyone. So I will be probably getting into my slides, and I hope it is visible to everybody. And
It is not, you just adjust,
I will
it's not
make it.
visible.
I will make it full screen so that is it okay now?
No, it is not visible. No.
It's not visible yet. Just,
Mr.
I,
Manish,
I'll just do this share screen. This Is it okay?
it's not visible. Just, it's not coming.
Although it's not coming. Press the button, share screen, and after that select the screen icon, and after that press the share button.
Shall I start showing it?
I Is it okay? Is it coming?
It's not coming.
The entire screen is coming. Select the button. Just open the PDF first, na?
I have opened
PDF.
the this thing share screen. Uh,
Yes, the screen was able to show on the screen, but you didn't open the PDF. Click that and open the PDF.
Just load. Or you speak, hello, hello.
Yeah.
You can.
Have you got my this thing, my email? Got the presentation?
I'm trying to share it.
Uh, I am
Just
not
one.
getting. I'm not able to click the share button for whatever reason.
Okay, just to let me.
So you have to select the screen and after that click the share button.
Yeah, just 1 minute. Why it is not coming? Hello, hello. Okay, you start speaking. Hello, Dr.
Yeah,
Mishra. You
yeah.
speak.
Right? It came,
Um,
sir, within 1 second.
you have got at least one copy with you. The first, I mean, 20 odd slides are identical. So I think, can you please, I mean, project it? I mean, I'm not able to click the share button
It
at
is
all. That is green. That is
here.
green.
It is not coming here. That's the problem.
Select the share button. After that, a screen will come. Click on
You speak. You speak. Hello, hello. You speak from
Okay.
your screen. Hmm.
I think whatever I sent it, the first one, the first 20-25 slides are identical, so you can project that one if you don't have the newest one.
No, no. The thing is that you speak. No, let us start. Screen may not be visible. You speak from your slide. Hello.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
Uh, I I believe that may not be too easy because there are too many things. So anyway, I'll try to do it, and as soon as you get it in your mailbox, you can probably I mean share your screen and make it visible. We have briefly an agenda. What exactly is open source software and FOSS, a little more formal definition. And I think, as Professor Moni has said, why does it matter? I will try to re-emphasize a couple of other points, and we will try to build up the advantages of open source software and FOSS, and we'll see what is the current scenario, what is the current situation that you should be aware of as a student or as a practitioner, and how do students really capitalize on that? Because the target audience is having a significant number of students. We'll try to say that how does it really, help the students to really go forward and make use of these advantages. And in the course of our talk, I will also provide just three major areas which probably will significantly impact the value that you obtain out of these. And, after that, we have a small, guideline as to, how it can help making India a little more self-reliant than what we are now. And uh, I think in the first slide, I have said that, what all makes me a little more confident about talking about open source. In my career, I have been probably a part of the open source movement for almost, 25 years now. A lot of activities that I have done is related to promoting open source and directly contributing to that one. And I, all of that has been a continuing effort. And today, I'm happy to see that open source has taken a lot more ground than what we probably thought would be possible in the 90s. And today it is the mainstream. In any kind of software. Well, when you say that, I think how open source can benefit the Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India, the clarion call given by the Honorable Prime Minister of the country, we will just try to consider that what are the ingredients to make any country self-reliant. One of the major ingredients to make a country self-reliant is to have, some kind of a, best-in-class high technology. In today's world, without high technology, you cannot become self-reliant because the population that we have got and the amount of resources we have got, if they have to be optimally utilized, they have to be properly, benefiting the country. We obviously need to produce a lot of things for ourselves. We need to, while we produce for the rest of the world, we also have to produce a lot of things for ourselves. While the world is connected, to everything. There is a lot of interdependence, but to become self-reliant in key things that we have got with us, that is the our resources uh, uh, and everything else, we require the best-in-class high technology. And the best-in-class high technology doesn't just mean that I think we import the equipment and really do the things here. We really need to have the best possible patents and people who create the patents and people who can enforce the patents and benefit out of it. So we need to have, best-in-class technology, patents plus people. People is a very important component, and India being a pretty young country, we have, in fact, by 2035, it is believed that almost 50% of the Indian population will become the major working force in the world because of the, age profile of our or the demography that could be happening. So we will have to leverage all those things to our benefit. And the only way to achieve that these huge body of manpower India has got almost, something like almost 1,000, this thing, almost 1 billion of people who will be in the working age group by 2025. We need to have high quality, standards based education to be given to our students in the country. Those who are students today, they will become the leading lights in the next 10 to 15 years. And uh, those innovative minds have to be trained and they have to do focused research without any significant barriers. Significant barriers are, are the barriers like lack of opportunity, lack of money, lack of proper guidance. These are significant barriers. We have to overcome those barriers also in order to, make things easier for our active minds or our, best minds to really do things
Uh,
properly.
Dr.
So,
Mishra, it's now visible. Dr. Mishra, it's visible now. You can guide me.
uh, can I? Is it okay, or shall I try this? Try to do the share screen.
No, screen now. It is coming now. It is visible.
Yes, yes. I'm able to see it on my screen. Yes,
Okay, fine. Now you tell
I'm
me that
able
you
to
are
see it on
using
my.
screen. I can project it from here.
Yes, you can project it. I think just I think next slide when I say or something like that, you can probably go to
Okay,
the
fine,
next slide.
fine.
So it is. So So our objective is really to be in a position to help our students' body or our working class. People who are working in the high tech industry to create new products, processes, and practices, and they should be highly scalable and sustainable. I think in today's world, scalability and sustainability, these are the two goals which are normally not, emphasized. But I think once we emphasize that, we have products, we have processes, we have practices, and we can sustainably scale it up. We will be really winners. And we will see in the next, half an hour or so, we have got how free and open source software is a great enabler to do all these things. Next slide, please. Uh, in the but I think as I said, we require a little bit of formal, positioning for what is open source and what is FOSS. I will do that. Next slide, please. To do that, I will just first introduce you why this open source movement that really came. I mean, I think that leads to a very interesting piece of history. In 1990s and 1980s, there was no personal computers. There were big computer companies, IBM, Digital, I mean, there are many other names. They are not. I mean, Hewlett Packard is one of them, which is still existing. So it is. These were the big companies who were selling hardware boxes, big computers, house full of computers, truckloads of computers. But the pricing was for the hardware. There was no price for the software. But that had a limitation. Whatever software they gave you, you had to live with it, because they saw you had very little that you could do about this thing, because the hardware and the software, they were very tightly coupled, and the software did not have a separate pricing. So the most of these big vendors who used to charge millions of dollars of rupees, by the way, computers those days was probably 100 times costlier than what they are today for the same computing power. So they really tried to I mean, give you an impression that software is inside a black box, can't do anything. Whatever is given to you, either live with it or I mean, throw it away. So that was not a very happy situation. I mean, you paid so much of money for an equipment, for a piece of software, but it could not really be configured for your requirement. And whatever the vendor did, you had almost no ability to make any modification to that one. That is the time when this section of intelligentsia, computer professionals, they came together, particularly in the east coast of America, MIT, and places like that. They just got together and they started demanding more from the vendors, which was not coming. So they encouraged a major movement. They led a major movement towards the development of community-driven software. I mean, a lot of brilliant minds of that time, they got together and the community driven software that became the order of the day. They didn't have too much of success immediately, because there was a lot of money and muscle that was available with the big computer companies. But nevertheless, they made a small beginning, and we have started seeing the benefits of that today. Their idea was not to make the software free, in the sense that, I mean, you don't pay any money for software. Their idea was the freedom. The software which you buy or somebody gives it to you, you should be free to use it the way you want. That's very important. And in order to do that, you probably require the source code of the software. You may require a small functionality, extra functionality. You may require a little change in the way software is behaving. You may want a little bit of modification in the algorithm because you think this algorithm gives better result. But none of that was possible with the kind of software that was available in those days. So the freedom to modify the source code and use the software as appropriate to your need was the driving principle. Entities like Free Software Foundation, led by Richard Stallman, he's still alive and active, and he's still in news. This thing, he led the way, and many other big names of that era, uh, they really led the path. And many universities in USA and Europe, they started following these principles, following this thing, and they started developing tons of software on these lines. And what became very significant is this led to a lot of collaboration between capable software professionals, and it created a healthy ecosystem of open source software, which were of arguably better quality than the commercial software, and they were available almost at zero cost. The present day projects that you see, Professor Moni made a statement about GitHub. Prior to that, SourceForge was, in fact, for a long time, was really promoted by some of my employers. This thing, SourceForge and GitHub, these are the two familiar names today. They have carried the ethos forward, and we really are thankful that open source has made all these remarkable progresses because of the activities by these people. In our talk, we'll see Unix and Linux, and they were particularly enhanced by a huge body of the software that came from GNU. Or GNU, a lot of people call it. In fact, they got irritated as GNU became equated with Unix. So they gave their name. GNU is not Unix. That is what a recursive definition they gave to themselves. But the fact remains that Unix and C language and many things associated with it, they really became popular because of these activities of this huge body of open source software that was available. GNU is one of the premiers in really championing all those things. And easy and convenient licensing policies. I mean, there is that is a uh, 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 that's a big area. We'll not talk about it. We'll talk about only one licensing, GPL, General Public License. These licensing policies on the software, they also made it a lot more attractive so that a lot of people could use and the open source software that really spread. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Having seen what is open source software, let us see a little bit of what was the motivation behind the free and open source software. Open source software, as I said, that was never meant to be, I mean, a dollar free. People wanted, it is always accepted that anyone who has done the hard work to develop a software should get a little bit of payment for his effort. I mean, it may not have a, I mean, uh, this thing, 2-digit, 3-digit margin, but at least he should be able to make money out of it. So the open source software proponents, they emphasized on what was freedom in the software. Whereas the FOSS part of it, it is open source software where you are not going to pay much of money or very little money or even zero money in order to use the software. This became a little bit of a contentious issue in the 1990s and 2000. In 1990 and 2000, the personal computers became very common, and and it became while the hardware cost started declining because of the commoditization of the hardware, the software cost started climbing up. A lot of people they realized that companies like Microsoft, who had almost a monopoly on DOS, Windows, and Microsoft Office, they were really very costly. They were very costly for a lot of people. That led to this thing piracy, that led to a lot of unwanted activities in the software system. So there was a demand to bring down the cost of the software. And again, the open source people, they took a lead and they really encouraged people to create software which are functionally equivalent to the major commercial software, but they were available almost at zero cost. I think if you really look at it, the success of Linux and the success of the Microsoft OpenOffice clone, that is the LibreOffice, is really a part of the FOSS movement. In fact, FOSS has grown a lot more in today's world. We have really seen a lot of FOSS activities in the past 10 years or so. FOSS is just a way of life. Let us see who are those prominent personalities who have gifted all these advantages to us. I think I be very honest, I will bring out the names of two people. I mean, a lot of people you might have read the books by them, Thompson and Ricci. I mean, they have written probably the first book on C language. That's what I mean. You have written, but prior to that, both of them were actively involved in creating the Unix operating system. So Unix and C for a long time, they were taken synonymously. And these two gentlemen, they have greatly contributed towards a collaborative and open source software development. And, and their efforts have paid off. I mean, both of them are no more, but their efforts have paid off and everything has come to stay. I mean, Unix and C, they were the watershed projects in this open source movement. There is another, I mean, coming a little bit down, we can see the picture of Richard Stallman. As I said, he was probably the most notable name among the people who propagated open source software. He created the Free Software Foundation, and he continues to become a votary of what is happening today. He is a little, anti-establishment in the sense that he has a view which may not be always palatable to everybody, but nevertheless, his contribution of his Free Software Foundation cannot be forgotten. He's almost the godfather of this movement. The other figure that we see, you can recognize, is Linus Torvald. He is probably not as old as these people. He is in his early 50s. He is the one who started the Linux operating system as a student. This thing, and today you know where Linux has gone. His idea is to make open source software the way of life. And while he also doesn't say that there is yes, I mean, software has to be completely free and all those things, but freedom is something all these gentlemen, they really propagated. So today, as a country in India, we would love both freedom and I mean, zero cost. Looking at the huge population that we have got and the amount of money that we have got to spend on software is so little, we will benefit a lot by embracing open source software and FOSS as big as it can grow. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So we have, let us see some of the, I think in one key slide, we'll see what are the advantages of FOSS. We can really distribute into three parts. One of them is technical, the other one is financial, and probably the most important one in the middle is what is the business. Technical advantages are if anything that you are using, it has to be standards based. I mean, gone are those days when software, I mean, was used by tens of people or hundred. Today, any piece of software that you create, it has got the potential of reaching out to millions of people. So it has to be standards based. They have to work in many conditions which are not always the ideal conditions. So standards based software is what we need to have to have success. So software has to be peer reviewed. Again, I think you know, I mean, software being the, I mean, being so critical, it should not be malicious. It should not have too many bugs. It should not have anything that is unwanted. So in order to do that, the software should go through, any software that you use should have gone through a appropriate peer review process so that what you get is really the good ones. Unfortunately, a lot of commercial software, they do not get that kind of peer review in their first attempt. So there's a lot of iteration that goes through in updating the software. But in open source software, the peer review is almost simultaneous as the software is developing, so that the peer review helps you to get the higher quality software in a quick time. Freedom, we have already talked about it. You need software and it's a source code so that if you are capable, you will be able to tune it to your requirement and probably in terms of a better algorithm or to add a couple of functionality or even to eliminate a part of the functionality. All that you need, freedom is something which is important. And what you really do with your software, you have the freedom really to give it away to other people to do that. That's very important. And flexibility. Flexibility is the, I mean, pick and choose. I mean, what you really want. Suppose you are using a piece of software, you have paid hardly any money for it. If you want, you can throw it away. If a better piece of software is available, you can do that. So there are enough of technical advantages of using free and free software or open source software from technical grounds. On financial grounds, there is no lock-in. I mean, as you said that the options are many. There are for every commercial software, there are 3 to 5 equivalent open source software available. So there is no lock-in. If you don't like A, go for B, go for C. If you have capability, you can even develop one of those and really be done with that. Total cost of ownership, because the ownership cost is low and the usually the entry barrier is low. But over a period of time, you do not have to pay maintenance cost, royalties, and all those things. So that keeps your total cost of ownership to a lower value. And obviously, if the TCO is lower, the return on investment is also quite low. And you have the way of reusing the software as long as you want. It's not like you bought a piece of Microsoft Office, Microsoft had decided to hunt it out and you have to throw it. It's not never like that. So the technical and financial advantages are really the big ones for which a lot of people, they went for the software. But the big businesses, what they are looking at, they may have a little bit of money, they may have probably good amount of technical manpower. For them, also there is a big advantage. I mean, by big business, I mean including the government, defense, and all these big entities. They look at the cost. If you really look at it, per unit cost of a piece of software, if it is X, then a million people adopting it becomes a big number. But if the software which is costing a fraction of that, I think there's a lot of cost saving. Big businesses and governments and enterprises, they look at the cost saving. Security. security is a very important thing because a lot of peer review and standards they have gone through. Open source software, they are as secure or sometimes even more secure compared to commercial software, because the commercial software people, they really sometimes are known to be spying on you. They try to gather a lot of data for their benefit. Open source software probably doesn't do all that. You have a choice in open source software, and the reliability of open source software is considerably high because of the multiple peer reviews that have gone through over a period of time and all these things. So it is a win and win situation for almost everybody, whether you are an individual user or a small business or a big business or a big entity like government. Open source and software provides you all these advantages at one place. So there is no reason why you should really not embrace all these things and make benefits out of that. Next slide, please. So I think having built up a case in favor of open source software, let us see. Who have been the earliest beneficiaries of that, and how they have made our lives little easier and better. And uh, we'll pick up two examples. One of them is Unix. One of the other one is Linux, which is Unix and its many components. Uh, they really benefited out of the GNU software, which were some of the earliest pioneers in promoting open source software. Linux, which I call an inspired clone of Unix, continues to do the same. And let us spend a little bit of time on this thing. Next slide, please. What has happened is, I think this slide, many of us have probably seen earlier. I think, this is about the architecture of Unix and Linux. Very craftily, this architecture was created, way back in late 60s and early 70s by those pioneers, so that Unix could really, adorn itself with a lot of extra components. What Unix or Linux today, they are, I think, the specifics of the hardware, which is supposed to drive the operating system, is buried into a comparatively smaller part of the software that is called kernel. Today, if you really look at it, the Linux kernel has got, tens of millions of lines of code. It is by no means a small or mean software, but in the overall ecosystem, that is a controlled piece of software which does everything for you or manages the computer. That is a comparatively smaller part of what all the operating system can do. After the kernel, you have got a set of system calls. That is where the hardware independence comes. The system calls, they are independent of the hardware. So it is the system calls are available, or APIs, a lot of people they call it. These are available for you to software developers to create applications on top of that. You have got library routines, which are probably slightly version dependent, they could be, but they provide a neutral layer to which all these APIs they can address and get your job done. And top of that, you have got the applications which the ordinary users they need, and developers they create on that. But if you really look at it, this architecture has proven its worth in the last 50 to 60 years. And today, I think what I have shown here in this slide, the living Unix versions of today, you have got Solaris, that is, one of my earlier employers, this thing, Sun Microsystem, it started this one. Today, Solaris is owned by Oracle. AIX, that is the IBM's baby. HPUX, that is the baby of Hewlett Packard Enterprise, again, one of my ex-employers. You have got free BSD. BSD Unix is taken with, is talked about with a lot of reverence, and the BSD Unix has been available in various free use forms. Free BSD is one of the popular ones. You of course have Linux, and you have of course Mac OS, the big boy to the Unix of today. So if you really look at it, whether it was the Unix of the past or Unix of today, they have followed this architecture pretty well, and it has benefited everybody. Tremendously. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this slide is meant to be just, I think, I haven't told you what are the top characteristics of Unix and Linux. I mean, you can read it, I mean, leisurely. I mean, Unix has been supporting multitasking for all these years. I mean, probably, I mean, the next multitasking operating system that was successful, that probably came, I mean, probably with this thing, Windows 2000, that becomes really, I mean, very successful multitasking only after 10 years of iteration with Windows NT and things like that. So multitasking has been a part of Unix for all these 50 to 60 years. Multi-user, Unix has always been multi-user. Today, many people might be using Unix in a single user mode, but it started as a multi-user system and it continues to be there. Security has been built into Unix by design because the architecture that we saw previously, that is the one which brings in the security part of it. I mean, you can almost never fool the computer by doing too many bad things. Security is by design. So it is easier to identify and they trace the security, I mean, violations just in case they are happening. I mean, by any, I mean, I don't mean to say that other operating systems today, they are not secure. Today, Windows is probably as secure as Unix. But in the past, I think if you really had to take into account the security as one of the deciding things, Unix has always led the way. Even today, it is leading the way. Linux follows the path. Portability applications, I think, I mean, people are running lot of kinds of applications today. The applications that you have got in the world, I think they may be appearing to be little bit of I think monolithic of one kind of application. But in the last 50 to 60 years, you have all kinds of applications from COBOL to Fortran to C++ to Java to everything. Today, Unix and Linux platforms, they probably can support all kinds of applications and a lot of portability. It is because of the inherent portability available within Unix. As I said, the system calls and the library system, they provide a lot of reasons for applications written in almost any language to become portable. And last but not least, you get a huge amount of ecosystem of programs, tools, libraries, so that you can bring and adapt to these operating systems and really benefit out of it. So these are the 5 pillars on which I mean Unix and Linux, they started and they continue to really hold their uh, uh, I mean prominence because of these also. Some of the current status of the Unix. Next slide, please. As I have already said, the probably Unix is has been the most ported operating system in the world. Every every processor known in the world has probably had a round of I mean Unix running on it. But unfortunately, I mean businesses, they determine how long a product lives. Today, among the Unix versions, as I said, only 3 commercial Unix versions, in fact, 4 commercial Unix versions they are there. HPUX, which runs only on one processor, that is the Itanium 2, which is again a little bit of doubt how long Intel will continue to do that. Solaris runs on both Intel and AMD processors. It also runs on Spark, but Oracle today sells only special systems using Sparks. AIX, I think probably little more promising compared to the other two in terms of, I mean, future prospects. It runs on the PowerPC, I mean, architecture of IBM, and they seem to be doing reasonably well with their special offerings. Mac OS runs on Intel, and very soon it is going to run on ARM processor also. FreeBSD runs on Intel, ARM, and all those things. So if you really look at it, the current status of Unix has really I mean, to be honest, it has shrunk quite a bit. Today, the Unix is used. I mean, Unix is not as cheap as it was this thing. Probably some of the costliest systems of the world today, and some of the biggest systems, and some of the most business critical systems, they are running Unix today, and it is very costly. Only organizations can really buy that. If you are an individual user, your choice is probably limited to Mac OS and FreeBSD. And we'll look at a little bit of facts about Linux. Professor Moni has already said how Linux has become a champion in terms of adoption. You have got, I think, Apache Web Server, which is running almost 70% of the websites in the world. You have plenty of such this thing. Sendmail, you talked about it. DNS server, he talked about. I mean, in fact, the list goes on and on and on. There are, I think, the fact that I mean, MySQL is again, even though it is owned by Oracle, but it comes as a free-to-use license also. I mean, I think the lab stack that runs on the Unix that has been a champion, and it has been going on this thing. By the way, Linux has all been ported to practically every possible platform that is there. I mean, again, one of my ex employers, I mean, digital that was that I mean ported Linux onto the Alpha server. That was the first I mean big computer that really started running Linux, and today Linux is known for its, I mean, usefulness. What started with Linux 1.0, that was way back in 1991 by this thing, Linus Torvalds, is today running into 5.8, 5.9. He continues to hold a key role. I mean, on the Linux kernel, you can't add anything to Linux kernel without his explicit approval. But it has been good for everybody, and I think you have a lot of Linux distributions. I mean, Linux is free to use, but if you want support on Linux, if you want doing business critical things on Linux, you probably need some support. And we'll talk a little bit about the popular Linux options that you may have to benefit out of it. I think another fact I must make a mention here. Uh, every 6 months, the industry categorizes the top 500 supercomputers in the world. Of the top 500 supercomputers in the world, there are probably 475 of them, or more than 96% of them, they are running today on Linux. I mean, it could be customized Linux, but they are running on Linux only. So I think these are some of the great things Linux has really survived, and we'll see how we can really make good use of that. Next slide, please. We this slide is actually is a little dense slide. I'll take about 5 minutes really to really explain what it talks about. The hardware part of the Linux is taken care of. I mean, any hardware that you have today that can run Linux goes without saying, whether it is Intel processors, ARM processors, PowerPC, I mean Spark, anything that you have got, or Intel's Titanium, all of them will be able to run. So we have taken the hardware part. Hardware part means I think you have got the processor, you have got the networking, you have got storage. Anything that you have got, Linux can run on top of that. On top of those things, you run some of the primary services. These primary services, the Linux server that can run, it could be a DHCP client or server, DNS, proxy, firewall. Many kinds of file this thing. I mean, protocols such as CIFS, NFS, all these things. You on top of that, you have created. A lot of layers like SMTP, IMAP, COPS, this thing. So I think the green layer that you are seeing, that is almost done. You don't have to do anything on top of that. They come out of the Linux vendor or the hardware provider who provided Linux or Unix to you. That layer is almost fixed. You pay money for that. In fact, Apache Web Server has probably gone into that stage of, internalization into a Linux server. On the next layer, which is really the orange layer, that's very important. That important layer is something which you should, that is what Microsoft is trying to do today. You have you can run native Linux applications. That is because it has the Linux ELF runtime available on top of that. Microsoft did not have this feature available very soon. Now they have started bundling of a Linux runtime also as a part of the Windows server and workstation. But Linux ELF you will be able to run on top of a Linux machine. Java runtime, I think almost any Linux that you have that has got a JRE or a Java runtime available, versions could be a little different, but Java runtime. But you also have for the last 15 years or more, why 15 years? For more than 20 years now, again, one of my ex-employers, this thing, Suze and Navel, they really created a system, what is called a Mono, this thing, which provides which is this thing, open source implementation of the .NET runtime. So you will be able to, for the last 20 years or more, you have been able to run .NET applications also on top of Linux if you so choose. So there are three kinds of applications today that you really see. One of them is applications compiled for Linux, applications compiled for Java, or applications created for Windows. So if you have a Linux system today, you will be able to run all three kinds of applications on top of this thing. Microsoft is just beginning to deliver that. I think they also have this same infrastructure today, but Linux has been a absolute pioneer on top of that. On top of that, if you are talking about the data, I think you require, a database server, could be Microsoft SQL server, MS SQL server, or MySQL server, Postgres server, all kinds of RDBMS, they have been ported into, including no SQL, etc. They have all been ported onto the Linux also. The middleware, almost every middleware is available on Linux. You have, any portal software you can run on top of that, and a huge bunch of system management tools. So Linux is a complete system, whether you are coming from the era of COBOL Fortran, or you are developing the newest of, serverless applications or the microservices that you are developing. Linux is the ideal platform for all of you. The application developers, if you have any application A to Z, you can run on today's on a competent Linux application. Particularly the commercially supported Linux, they support all of these things. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I think here I will take a little bit of this thing. What are those FOSS and open source software that they have made a name for themselves? And I think I picked up only the top 5 or 7. Mozilla Firefox. I think if you are not using it, my request is please use that. They are really the champions as far as the browsing world is concerned, and they are in dire straits. Their market share has come down to 4 to 5% only. I think you will not lose a dime by using Mozilla Firefox. Please do use that. I think it can very well replace wherever you have got the other browser as you have got. This thing, LibreOffice is a Microsoft Office compatible software. It is again free of cost. You can run it on Windows, you can run it on Linux, you can run it on Unix, everywhere. Please use that. Mozilla Thunderbird is a Microsoft Outlook clone. Microsoft Outlook software I personally use because it is sophisticated, quite good, and it fits well into the corporate environment. But I think with very little effort, you can also do, this thing, Mozilla Thunderbird also into your system. Some of the 3-4 other things I have mentioned: Jim, VLC this thing, media player, Blender, and these are some of the other personal productivity stuff you can use. The last one is very important: GNU Compiler Collection. Everything said and done, in the compiler world, probably the stage of 1970s, 80s still remains. If you want to buy a commercial compiler, be it from Intel, be it from IBM, be it from Portland, they cost you a bomb of money. But the GNU compilers, which are free of cost, available for every platform, they still produce extremely high quality binaries. You should probably use them if you are not, for any reason, tied down to those commercial compilers. So I think, as a proponent of things, open source, I suggest that you should use these 7-8 pieces of software to your great advantage. Next slide, please. Let us look at a little bit of this thing. Who are the major players? If you are using Linux for your desktop, I think your choices, I would suggest that you can choose any one of them with good reason. Ubuntu is pretty well known. OpenSUSE is perhaps the most complete Linux desktop system that you can get it, and probably the easiest to use. Fedora is also not bad at all. Debian is again a very creditable option. Choose what you like more, but I personally use OpenSUSE because of its completeness. If we're looking at the enterprise software, this thing, I think Red Hat is the leader in the pack, has almost 70% of the market share. SUSE is probably the next one, and Oracle also provides Oracle Linux. And between these three, they provide very high quality enterprise supported Linux options, which probably corporates pay and this thing governments pay to for their support. If you are looking at the major contributors who are, I think we must make a mention of that one. Apache has been mentioned by Professor Moni and myself earlier. I think I have picked up the top 5 or 6, contributors to the open source and Linux in today's world. GNU is high in the list. Intel as a player, Intel doesn't have an operating system, but Intel provides a very huge amount of software, particular to the kernel. IBM has been a leader for all these years, this thing, and Google and Microsoft. These are the two unlike entities. They have also started, contributing in a big way into the open source. So today, I think this is what is the playground where we have a lot of these things. Now, let us, I think, in the next 15 minutes or so, I will try to spend some time to how the students and the researchers, particularly in the kind of environment that CIDSA has got, they can benefit out of these. Let us see. Next slide, please. So it is, students have to be, as we said, everyone is not equal. No two individuals, they can be identical. So you have to really see that what is your capability, what is your goal in life, how you can contribute or how you can optimize your effort. So I think I have categorized the computer uses into 4 categories: end users, application developers, administrations and system tool developers, and the system software developers. These are 4 categories. You can look at this slide a little carefully, which bucket that you fit in. Depending on where you fit in, your skill levels will be higher. On the leftmost, the skill level is the lowest. In the rightmost, the skill level is the highest. So depending on your interest, depending on the opportunities that you get, and depending on how you see your future and your capability, you will be able to choose one of those. So if you are a student, probably going to spend some time with IT, you put yourself into one of the buckets and accordingly take your call how much of skill you should get it. I think we'll go to the next slide, please. A student should start. I think I'm assuming a student who has a reasonably good interest in information technology career. He should, as we said, his entry level barrier has already been broken. First of all, I think a student has already come to an university. He has the benefit of the college. He has got the benefit of the teachers. He has got the benefits of the library. All those things. Apart from that, he probably has a PC of his own, PC or laptop of his own, so he can do an experiment. So if you want to practice and this thing open source software, then probably install a version of the Linux or BSD Unix. It doesn't matter if you've got a Mac OS, it can do practically everything. And learn at least one programming language. I still will be a little conservative in telling that starting with C, C++ is the ideal way to start. But a lot of people, they don't agree, particularly in the new generation. But you can start anyone: C, C++, Java, C Sharp, Swift. Swift is a great language from Apple. You can definitely spend time and effort in that one. That is also available on Linux platforms. You should learn at least one scripting language: Unix shell, Perl, Python, JavaScript. Any one of them you learn well, that should really give it a good head, good path forward. Python is probably the ideal one to begin with, and you should have a little bit of exposure to databases: MySQL, PostgreSQL, SQLite, R. These are all available free of cost. You can do that. Your exposure to the software system should be through appropriate IDE and development tools. I believe Visual Studio, even though it comes from Microsoft, is still free of cost. You can get the community edition and get done with it. GitHub is again a free source which you can use. You of course have got good old GNU and Eclipse and this thing. Eclipse and NetBeans, they are a little bit, I think, require a little bit of extra learning. You may not start with that one, but the GNU people is good enough for people who are using a command line tool or something like that on Linux. But Visual Studio and GitHubs, they are probably good entry point. IDEs for you if you are going to become a learner in a Windows environment. And one thing that you should see, you should have a little bit of idea about cross-platform development. As a developer, you do not know who is your employer going to be, whether he is going to put you into a Windows-based development or a some kind of a development that takes place in a embedded soft system, or he is going to put you into a Linux-oriented system. You don't know that, so you should have a little bit of idea about the multi-platform development, software development tools. Mono, I have already made a mention of that little earlier. .NET Core, Microsoft has seen the light of the day. By the way, this company Mono and Xamarin, they propagated that they have been bought over by Microsoft. Microsoft has open sourced the .NET part of their up to the .NET 3.5. They have open source that is coming available to you as a .NET Core. So it is open source today. So .NET strictly is no longer a closed technology. So you should have a little bit of, if you know a little bit of .NET Core programming using Visual Studio or something like that, you can practically do build applications on all platforms, from Mac OS to Linux to Windows. So better do that. So here my objective is not really to put one against the other. I mean, you may be a lover of Windows, you may be a lover of Mac OS. They are not your enemies. You can do everything using those. The fact is that with Linux, you have a slightly more options. And I think Linux provides you a much easier, access to things. And probably you can start with Linux, but if if you love Windows and Mac OS, you will go and do that. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, I have 3 slides from now on to really tell you what are the areas, to my mind, a student of today or who is going to probably go to the market in the next 1 year or so, what he should concentrate on. Data analytics is one area where I think there's a lot of activity happening and people are getting a lot of, good jobs out of this thing, data analytics. Quickly taking, I think, who needs it? Almost everybody needs some kind of analytics, whether you are a big company or a government, or you are a researcher doing research in medicine, agriculture, science, humanities, you require data analytics. Your potential employer can be any one of those. And you can probably, there are 3 pieces of software which are available in open source and free to use. R is one of those. I strongly recommend that you should use that. But there are 2 other pieces of software which are equally good, and they are highly compatible with very successful commercial software called MATLAB, GNU Octave, and Scilab. These are the 2 things. If you don't have MATLAB, which costs almost 20,000 rupees for an extra, don't have it, your university may have, you can use that, but you can also use GNU Octave and Scilab to really this thing. One advice here, analytics is a huge field. Don't try to do everything by yourself. Usually, you should be able to, depending on your skill level, depending on your interest, you should really put yourself in one of the baskets that I just showed earlier and really go ahead and learn things appropriately. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, here is I think people who come with a bit of engineering background, they must have known, what Raspberry Pi means, what Arduino means. I think most of the colleges, they have courses courses on Raspberry Pi and Arduino. As we understand, Arduino is one of the open source piece of hardware that is equivalent of open source software. Open source hardware is that. Raspberry Pi is a single board microcomputer which has really grown over a period of time. Currently, Raspberry Pi 4 can even replace your personal computer. But the good thing about it, it is very cheap and it is very easy to learn. Anyone who has learned a little bit of Linux, even Windows, I would emphasize on Linux though, will be able to find it very easy to get into this one. Why I'm talking about Raspberry Pi? Because huge amount of activity that is going on in the IoT segment, Internet of Things. Internet of Things is basically is uh, 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 is the area which is getting fueled due to automation and digitalization. Huge amount of data getting collected because of by digital means. Huge amount of this thing. Automation is happening in both the home sector, industrial sector, and in many other entertainment sector. So Raspberry Pi gives you a pretty good opportunity to really get into that one. There are, it is very easy. If your college is able to do only this much, you can definitely do because by spending about 10,000 rupees, you have got everything that you need to get started on this one. Hundreds of thousands of documents are available, which help you to create new applications, to explore and to test. Most importantly, it probably brings a grain of design thinking into your mind. Actually, where in India we have lacked so far greatly is the design thinking. That design thinking, unfortunately, is not happening as well in the colleges. Sorry saying about it, but what I have seen that good design is not one of the things which has been our strength neither in the industry or in the academia. So you should try to learn a little bit of designing using this small system that you have got. And if you have a good design, you will be more successful. And I think that will be also be forcing you to do that whatever is followed by the software life cycle, design, develop, test, and deploy. I mean, in a little professional manner. So if you are coming with a little bit of engineering background with hardware and software as your key skills, then Raspberry Pi is one area where you should really invest time and effort. And the IoT segment is so large today that I think there will be no difficulty in getting a good job and contributing to a larger ecosystem. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The, the last thing that in my 3 slides that I created for students, that is this one is app development for mobiles. I think this has become I think you can see an advertisement today. I think a 3-year-old kid is developing an app. I don't give too much of emphasis to that one. There's too much of publicity. The developing a serious app requires quite a bit of skill. Yeah, it requires a larger team also. A single person may not be able to do that. Don't get carried away by Mr. X saying that I am going to, because I know how to make an app, I will become a entrepreneur and all that. These are all bit of a humbug. It's not always happen. So learn how to become a 3-year-old can develop an app. A 30-year-old can develop a 10-line app, but that is not what you are looking for. If you are looking for serious apps to be created, you need to spend a lot of time, interest, and skill. Developing a complex app requires a larger team with multiple skills, which one single person may not always have, and it requires money also. You require the tools. I think if you are going to use the most popular this thing, Android Studio or a Visual Studio, which a machine itself might cost a lakh of rupees. So it's not easy. So always try to think big. Just getting into this habit is not good enough. I have also put tools, lightweight development systems. One of them is pretty popular, MIT App Inventor or Glide. You can use, these are low cost. In fact, they are zero cost. You can try with that one. But to be a serious, I want, people to become serious Android, serious app developers, whether it's for Android platform, iOS platform, or any other platform immaterial, using a serious tool like Android Studio or a Visual Studio, which helps you to develop cross-platform application development. You require quite a bit of grounding, and that grounding probably as a student from a good university and with good guidance, you should be able to do that. Next slide, please. So we have seen what the students should really do in terms of, getting into the stream. I mean, where they are, creative energy and learning and their interest that should be putting into that one. So I think in this slide, we'll talk a little bit about, how Atmanirbhar Bharat is going to be benefited by what all we have said so far. Universities alone can motivate, teach, guide, and incubate new ideas of our bright students on a mass scale. I'm not talking about this thing. I have mentored a few students. I have mentored a few people in our small companies. I have mentored a few students when I was working for big companies, but that is not really the scale we are talking about. The scale we are talking about hundreds and thousands of students who can be can be motivated, can be taught appropriately, can be guided, and their entrepreneurial thought process can be incubated into products and services. All that will be possible only within universities. And for that, the faculty members have to play a very key role. Training the faculty members accordingly is a big, big job. And I think whether it is open source or not, that's not the point. The point is the teachers and the faculty who are molding these students, they have to be appropriately trained. The second thing is, I think a lot of people you might have heard telling it, data is the new fuel. I think one of the days when people are telling that oil is coming from Middle East, that is the fuel. That's not this thing. Data is the new fuel, and AI, that is the artificial intelligence and machine learning led software, is the new engine. So I think this analogy is quite correct. We need to create solutions for existing problems and futuristic problems. If the country has to be absolutely reliant on itself, it has to be confident on itself. It has to have business interconnects with the rest of the world. But at the same time, we should be able to solve majority of our problems by ourselves, and we should be able to anticipate a problem and solve some futuristic problems also. And this can be done by fusing software with data. And fusing software with data, it requires the models, it requires the prototypes, it requires the ability to transfer these models and prototypes to a bigger world. And I think this is where the universities can play a very big role. Using open source software and FOSS, we definitely avoid the problem of reinventing the wheel. A lot of people, because of the lack of exposure and opportunity, they reinvent the wheel. I think open source and software that has seen to it that you are not reinventing. You are not starting in 1970. You are starting in 2020. Exactly what you need, you already have created for you. You can take it forward. Inherent collaborative methods help in the open source technology, help to bring together chunks of like-minded knowledge workers, students in your case, together and work towards new innovative solutions. And as you say, when you are working in a big group, the community learning and the community productivity is much higher than individual learning and individual productivity. So you reduce the cost and you reduce the time. So for that, you should be able to set up a software center with specialization on OS. It is should not be just another software lab. I know every college, every university has got a lab. This system has to be completely, motivated, and it should have the right ingredients, right people. That's the most important people: the teachers, faculty, and the mentors. They ought to have a multidisciplinary approach to things. To that extent, universities, they are found slightly wanting because they don't have that kind of material available to them. But it is not very difficult. They should be able to get help from outside to train their teachers and really create the leadership team which can really lead this center of open source software. Teachers, academia, university, and government, they should do their bit. They should provide the encouragement, probably the finances to do all that. That is their major role. And last but not least, incubate the spirit of entrepreneurship, this thing among the students. That's very important, because without that extra spirit, if I am interested in getting a job for 25,000 rupees and be happy, that's not the idea. The idea is you should be able to see the moon and try to get really, really get there. and that is entrepreneurship. And our students, large body of good students that we have got, we should motivate them to get into that. Now I'm coming to the end of my talk. I will try to summarize what all we discussed. In that summary, we discussed a little bit about the evolution of the open source, FOSS, Linux, and Unix being the biggest beneficiaries of this thing. We talked a little bit about that. Interesting piece of history, motivating to anyone who is a learner today, and this thing that should be the model that we should follow even for future. We talked about some of the contemporary systems, and where there are really, I mean, opportunities that helps you could see that. We talked about the roadmap that the students should follow using essentially self-help. Here I do understand that a university system provides a great amount of guidance to the students, but again, you can take the horse to the water. The water has to be drunk, the horse has to drink the water. So self-help is a big part of your learning. So a roadmap was prepared for students to do self-help and be ready with contemporary technologies with relevant skills in the areas of great potential. The three areas that we talked about, one of them was really about the data analytics, about using the Raspberry Pi system for IoT-based development, and also we talked about, this thing, the exotic area of developing apps for, mobile devices. I think with that, I believe we have been able to prove to an extent that open source software and and the FOSS as an offshoot of it are great enablers of really getting us into a better self-reliant mode, better leveraging the talent we have in our system, better engaging the young population we have got in our system, and I think it will be all success if individually everybody is success. If university is successful in doing its part of the job, I'm sure the country as a whole will be beneficiary, and we can proudly say that we have become Atmanirbhar. Thank you. Thank you very much. If there is any question, I can probably take one or two, or if you want, you can always write to me on my email. Not able to hear you, sir.
Dr. Mishra, we have requested the viewers to send their queries in the chat box, prefixing question and answer. We have not received it, but if they have sent it through email, we will, reply to them after consulting you to the, participants. So we thank you from the university and from the Center of Excellence for your very grateful and insightful and thought-provoking address to the participants of the international webinar on uh, open source digital technologies towards self-reliant India, Atamnirbhar Bharat. As you very rightly given the title for your talk, a roadmap for students using free and open source software and reaching goals of Atmanirbhar Bharat. In your 26 slides, except the last one, 25 slides are the treasures for not only the students to become an entrepreneur and the faculty members and the other practitioners who would like to get involved in using open source software for making contribution to self-reliant India, Atmanirbhar Bharat. And in that aspect, you have beautifully, professionally, scientifically, technologically brought out all the relevant issues, in a very emphatic manner as a teacher, as a mentor, as a researcher, as you are always, you brought, brought it very, emphatically to the participants. I am very happy to, organize this program, especially with you, a veteran in the field, having vast experience by bringing out the first version of Linux binary in National Informatics Center and operationalized in a very effective manner. And you also brought during this 1 hour 35 minutes presentation your vast rich experience in this field, and from the university and from me personally got a lot of benefit out of it, lot of learning, and also it have energized everybody, even at me at the age of 67, to get into open source in a very big manner, to bring in that large scale, uh, you know, uh, deployment and development of various prototype models for development in for grassroots level development. And I'm very happy that you gave a very good historical perspective of open source development, open source software development, and free and open source software development, and also introduced the four stalwarts of this open source movement, and also brought out for the benefit of the software developers the technical issues, the business issues, and the financial issues in a very effective manner in the different headings. If anybody would like to get into this open source software development, they would like to, give importance for these aspects which you have given three major headings, and the technical and the business and financial. And then you also dealt with architecture of Unix and Linux in a very effective manner. And then you also suggested the essential software which the software developers should understand. And last but least is that the the very effective way forward you suggested that in an university environment, in order to make the students skill and ownership oriented, in the area of open source software and free and open source software, you very rightly said the steps to be undertaken with respect to Atmanirbhar Bharat. One is that that train the faculties. Second one is steps to create models and prototype. Third is that set up a software, center with specialization on open source software, and then the entrepreneurship of the students. That is a very important thing. That so these four steps are way forward for in any university who are interested in to contribute for their expertise for building up uh, self-reliant India. And he also said it very effectively that we have to develop skills in the students for cross-platform applications. This is where the wealth can be generated, the skill can be developed, and so on and so forth. And in nutshell, you have given, yeah, you have addressed through your presentations, that open source software paradigm is an important thing, that the in order to bring in self-reliant India, the Atmanirbhar Bharat, in order to make the vision of our honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, his mission of vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat in a mission-oriented manner, the universities have a lot to contribute through technology development and train the students, and by training the faculties in the software that is an open source software. Thank you very much, Dr. B.K. Mishra, for accepting our invitation, and also you know addressing the participants of the international webinar series number 2 by providing a roadmap for open source software and free and open source software, the utilization by the students for making India self-reliant. Atmanirbhar Bharat. Thank you, Dr. B.K. Mishra.
Thank you.
Thank you.